My husband called me to ask, "Are you aware your dad's body is missing from his grave?" "What do you mean, like someone took it?" "I'm serious, Martha. I'm here right now for the flowers like you asked. The grave is dug up. Empty." His voice was shaky. My phone buzzed with a photo. I nearly dropped it seeing Dad's grave torn open. The casket visible at the bottom covered in dirt. The lid pried open and nothing inside. This wasn't some prank. Someone had actually stolen my father's body. I abandoned my cart and ran to my car. Called 911 while speeding to the cemetery. They said units were already on scene. Multiple graves had been disturbed. Not just vandalism, but actual body snatching. Who does that and why my dad specifically? Nelson met me at the cemetery entrance looking pale. Police had the whole section taped off. An officer took our statements while crime scene techs photographed everything. They said it looked professional. Not kids messing around, but someone who knew what they were doing. Dad had only been gone 6 months. The cancer took him fast after diagnosis. Now someone had violated his rest and taken his body. I couldn't stop shaking thinking about it. Nelson held me while we watched them work. The detective asked about enemies Dad might have had. People who'd want to disrespect him like this. I couldn't think of anyone. He was a retired accountant who played golf and watched football. Not someone who inspired grave robbing. "What about your mother?" The detective checked his notes. Mom had been in prison for the last 2 years. Fraud charges from her job at the bank. She and Dad had divorced right before her trial. She'd missed his funeral because they wouldn't give her leave to attend. But she'd just been released 3 weeks ago. I told the detective it couldn't be her. She was staying with her sister in Florida as part of her parole. Had to check in regularly and couldn't leave the state. Plus, she and Dad had made peace with each other before he died. Still, the detective looked skeptical. He asked for Mom's contact information, and I gave it reluctantly knowing they'd bother her during an already difficult time. She was trying to rebuild her life after prison. We went home in shock. Nelson made dinner while I sat on the couch refreshing news sites. The story was spreading fast. 3 bodies stolen from Riverside Cemetery. All recent burials. No obvious connection between them except timing. Families devastated and confused. My phone rang showing Mom's number. I answered expecting tears and disbelief about Dad. Instead, she sounded weirdly calm. Asked if I was okay. Said she'd heard about the cemetery on the news. Promised she had nothing to do with it. "I know, Mom. The detective just has to check everyone." I tried to reassure her. She said she understood and quickly changed topics. Asked about my job and Nelson. Talked about her new apartment and looking for work. Normal mom stuff that felt bizarre given the circumstances. Like Dad's missing body was just another news story. The detective called the next morning. Mom's alibi had checked out. Her parole officer confirmed she'd been in Florida the whole time. Electronic monitoring showed she hadn't left her approved radius. Dead end on that theory. Days passed with no leads. The other families held memorials with empty caskets. We didn't know what to do. Until Nelson suggested we take a break from thinking about it, ironically enough. He wanted to see a movie or have dinner out. Try to feel normal for a few hours. I agreed reluctantly. We were getting ready to leave when my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. Someone had tagged me in a post. I almost ignored it, but the preview showed Mom's name. I opened the app and nearly threw up. Mom had posted a selfie. But she wasn't alone in the photo. Next to her wearing sunglasses and one of his old Hawaiian shirts was my father. Clearly deceased but propped up like a mannequin. Her arm around him. Both of them smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Finally got my man back. Death couldn't keep us apart. Road trip time." My hands shook as I showed Nelson. He grabbed the phone and stared in horror. Mom had stolen Dad's body. Drove from Florida despite her ankle monitor. Dug him up and was now taking selfies like they were on vacation. The location tag showed them at a rest stop in Georgia. Heading north. More photos loading as she posted them. Dad buckled into the passenger seat. Dad at a gas station. Dad wearing a new baseball cap she'd bought him. Comments poured in from horrified friends and family. People asking if this was a sick joke. If she'd lost her mind. Begging her to stop and return the body. But Mom kept posting. Living out some twisted fantasy with Dad's corpse. I called the detective with shaking hands. Sent him screenshots before Mom could delete them. He said units were mobilizing to intercept her. The ankle monitor must have malfunctioned or been tampered with. They'd track her phone and stop this insanity. Nelson held me as I sobbed. The detective called 20 minutes later saying they were tracking Mom's phone signal heading north on I-95. He promised they'd intercept her within hours, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I refreshed her Facebook page over and over. More photos kept loading every few minutes, making my stomach turn. There was Dad propped up in a booth at some diner with a menu in front of him like he was deciding what to order. Another showed him wearing new sunglasses Mom must have bought at a gas station. Nelson brought me tea, but I couldn't drink it because my throat felt too tight. My phone rang and Rachel Vaughn's name appeared on the screen. Mom's sister was crying. So hard I could barely understand her at first. She kept apologizing over and over, saying she had no idea Mom had left the apartment. She thought Mom was just sleeping in late when she went to work that morning. The ankle monitor never sent any alerts to her phone like it was supposed to. Rachel said Mom had been talking about Dad constantly for the past week. She'd been saying things like they belonged together forever, and death was just a temporary separation. Rachel thought it was just grief talking, and never imagined Mom would actually do something like this. The detective called back an hour later with an update. Mom's phone had pinged near a truck stop in South Carolina according to the cell towers. Highway patrol units were converging on that location, but she had at least a 30-minute head start on them. He warned me that Mom might try to come to our house since she knew where we lived. He suggested we pack a bag and stay with friends tonight just to be safe. But I couldn't leave because what if she actually brought Dad here? The thought of Mom pulling into our driveway with Dad's body in the car made me want to throw up. Nelson started boarding up the back door with plywood from the garage while I sat frozen on the couch. He double-checked all the window locks and moved a dresser in front of the sliding glass door. My phone started ringing again, and this time it was Glenn Contreras, Mom's parole officer. He sounded embarrassed and defensive as he explained how the ankle monitor had failed. Apparently, Mom had figured out how to trick the system using aluminum foil wrapped in a specific pattern. She must have learned the technique from someone in prison because it created a false signal that made it look like she was still in the apartment. Glenn said they were reviewing all their protocols, and this had never happened before in his 15 years on the job. My phone started exploding with text messages and Facebook notifications from family members and old friends who had seen Mom's posts. Most people were horrified and asking if this was some kind of sick joke. A few thought the photos were fake or photoshopped somehow. My aunt was having a complete breakdown about what this would do to our family's reputation in the community. I turned off most of the notifications but kept checking Mom's page obsessively every few minutes. Around midnight, she posted a video that made everything worse. She had Dad buckled into the passenger seat and was singing their wedding song to him while stroking his face. The video was dark and grainy, but you could see Dad's body slumped against the window. The comments section turned into a war zone with some people calling the police and giving location tips. Others were actually defending Mom as a grieving widow who just wanted to be with her husband. People were arguing about mental illness and whether this was a crime or just sad. The detective texted me that they'd found Mom's car abandoned at a rest stop near the North Carolina border. She must have switched vehicles somehow or maybe hitchhiked with someone. They were reviewing security camera footage, but she was being clever enough to avoid the main cameras. She'd left Dad's Hawaiian shirt on the driver's seat like some kind of message. I finally broke down completely around 2 a.m. Nelson found me on the bathroom floor sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe properly. My chest hurt and I kept gasping for air between the tears. He held me while I screamed about how sick this whole thing was. Then a minute later, I'd be defending Mom saying she was mentally ill and needed help, not prison. The conflicting emotions felt like they were tearing me apart from the inside. Part of me hated her for doing this to Dad and to our family. Another part remembered the mom who raised me and took care of me when I was sick. At 3 a.m, my phone rang with Mom's number on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but Nelson said the police might be able to trace the call. Mom's voice sounded eerily calm, like she was calling to chat about the weather. She told me she was taking Dad on one last adventure to visit all the places they went when they were young. She said I'd understand when I was older that true love transcends death and physical boundaries. She talked about their first date at a drive-in movie theater that had been torn down years ago. She described how handsome Dad looked in his uniform when he came back from the army. She said they were meant to be together and nothing could keep them apart now. The detective was gesturing at me to keep her talking while he worked with someone on another phone. Mom kept going on about how Dad understood her even after the divorce. She mentioned stopping at gas stations every few hours to buy bags of ice, said she was keeping him fresh in a cooler she bought. Her voice sounded so normal talking about this insane thing, like she was describing a regular road trip instead of driving around with a corpse. The detective wrote something on a notepad and showed it to me. Asked about who helped her. I cleared my throat and asked Mom how she managed to dig up the grave by herself. She laughed and said she wasn't alone. Someone from her grief support group had helped her. A person who really understood what it meant to lose someone you loved. She wouldn't tell me who it was, just said they were special and knew exactly what to do. The detective started making calls to track down grief support groups in Florida. My phone beeped with another call coming through. Duncan Irwin from the cemetery. Mom was still talking, so I let it go to voicemail. She was describing their first apartment together 40 years ago. How Dad would bring her flowers every Friday. The detective held up a sign saying they almost had her location. Keep her talking. I asked Mom where she was planning to go next. She got quiet for a second, then said it was a surprise. Said Dad always wanted to see the ocean one more time. Then she hung up. The detective slammed his hand on the desk. They'd traced her to somewhere in North Carolina but couldn't get exact coordinates. I called Duncan back while the detective made more calls. Duncan apologized over and over about the security breach. Said Mom must have watched their patrol patterns for weeks to find the blind spot. The cameras didn't cover one section between the old oak trees. He offered to waive all fees for Dad's reburial when we got him back. Promised they were installing new cameras and hiring night guards. My phone rang again before I could respond. Alicia Rosa from the medical examiner's office. She needed to warn me about the health risks of transporting human remains without proper equipment. The decomposition process accelerated without refrigeration. Body fluids could leak and create biological hazards. The thought of Dad decomposing in Mom's car made my stomach turn. I barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. Nelson rubbed my back while I heaved into the toilet. When I came back out, my phone was blowing up with notifications. Mom had posted again on Facebook. The photo showed a beach at sunrise. Dad was propped in a beach chair wearing sunglasses and that stupid Hawaiian shirt. Mom had written about how he always wanted to see the ocean again. Several people in the comments recognized it as Virginia Beach. The detective immediately called Virginia State Police. They dispatched units to search the beaches. I kept refreshing Mom's page, waiting for more posts. Nelson made me eat some crackers and drink water. Said I needed to keep my strength up. The detective called 2 hours later. They'd found the beach chair and Dad's shirt abandoned on the sand. Mom was gone again. No sign of her or Dad anywhere. Security cameras showed her loading something heavy into a different car around dawn. She was getting better at avoiding capture. learning from each close call. The detective admitted she was showing more cunning than most fugitives. My phone rang with an unknown number. A woman's voice I didn't recognize. Said she was Mom's former cellmate and had seen the news. Mom had talked about Dad constantly in prison, drew pictures of them together in paradise, made up stories about their future reunion. The woman thought it was just lonely rambling at the time. Now she realized Mom had been planning something. Nelson suggested we pack bags and go to his parents' house for safety. I refused to leave. Part of me kept thinking Mom would just show up with Dad, that this nightmare would end if we stayed put. Another part was scared of what she might do if cornered. The FBI called that afternoon. Agent something. I didn't catch his name. Since Mom crossed state lines with human remains, it was federal now. He asked about Mom's mental health history. Any previous signs of obsession or delusion. I told him about the shrine she'd kept after the divorce. Photos of Dad covering her whole bedroom wall, even after he'd remarried and moved on. The agent took notes and said they'd be in touch. That evening, Mom posted again. The photo made me physically sick. She'd gotten a motel room somewhere. Had Dad tucked into the bed like he was sleeping. She was lying next to him with her arm across his chest. The caption talked about their second honeymoon. How they were finally together again after so long apart. The comments exploded with people reporting it to Facebook. Within an hour, the post was removed for violating community guidelines. But screenshots were already spreading across Twitter and Reddit. Our family's nightmare had gone viral. People were calling Mom the corpse bride and making jokes about true love never dying. The doorbell rang the next morning while I was still in my pajamas, and Nelson jumped up to check the peephole before opening it. A woman with a microphone stood there with a cameraman behind her, and Nelson immediately started closing the door, but she stuck her foot in the gap. "Just a quick statement about your mother," she said. But Nelson told her to get off our property or he'd call the cops. She backed away, but they set up their van right across the street, and I watched through the blinds as they filmed our house like we were some kind of reality show. I couldn't even go outside to get the mail without them rushing toward me, so I stayed inside feeling trapped while Nelson brought me food and tried to keep me calm. The detective called around noon with bad news that made my stomach drop. Mom had ditched her phone at a truck stop and used someone's stolen credit card at a hardware store for supplies before the trail went cold. He said most people on the run make mistakes in the first 3 days, but Mom was proving smarter than expected, and they had to expand the search radius. I hung up feeling sick and opened my laptop to check Facebook again when I noticed something weird in my message requests. Someone named Linda Morrison had sent me a friend request, and when I clicked the profile, my hands started shaking. It was Mom using a fake name, and the whole page was filled with love letters to Dad that she'd posted publicly. She wrote about their first date and their wedding, and how death couldn't separate true love, and in each post she talked about Dad like he was reading them and responding. The writing got more confused as I scrolled with past and present mixed together, and references to conversations they were having on their journey to forever. My phone rang, and I didn't recognize the number but answered anyway. A woman named Natalie introduced herself as a crisis counselor who'd been assigned to help me through the situation. She explained that what Mom was doing showed signs of a complete break from reality, probably triggered by grief combined with guilt about missing the funeral. She offered to meet with me after everything was resolved and gave me her direct number if I needed to talk before then. Rachel called right after I hung up with Natalie, and she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She'd found Mom's medication bottles hidden in the trash completely full, even though Mom had been pretending to take them every morning. The pills were for bipolar disorder, and without them, plus the stress of Dad's death, it created what Rachel called a perfect storm in Mom's brain. She kept apologizing like it was her fault for not watching closer, but I told her nobody could have predicted this level of breakdown. 3 days passed with no sign of Mom until my phone rang at dawn with the detective's number. Police in Delaware had spotted the stolen car at a gas station and moved to surround it, but Mom saw them coming and took off with Dad still strapped into the passenger seat. The chase didn't last long because she ran out of gas on some back road, and now she'd locked herself in the car, refusing to come out. He said negotiators were on scene trying to talk to her, but she kept screaming about them trying to separate her from her true love. Nelson turned on the news, and there it was, live on every channel with helicopters circling overhead filming the whole thing. The reporters were calling it the corpse bride case and speculating about Mom's mental state while showing old photos of our family from happier times. I wanted to throw the remote at the screen, but instead just sat there watching our private nightmare become entertainment for millions of strangers. My phone rang with an unknown number, and when I answered, I heard Mom's voice cracked and desperate. "They want to take him away from me," she sobbed, and for a second she sounded like my actual mother, not this stranger who'd been posting pictures with a corpse. She said she just wanted to say goodbye properly since the prison wouldn't let her attend the funeral, and it wasn't fair that everyone got closure except her. I tried to stay calm even though my hands were shaking and told her I understood, but she needed to let the police help her. She asked if I thought Dad would forgive her for everything that happened between them. The fraud that sent her to prison, and the divorce papers, and missing his funeral when he died alone without her there. I said yes, even though I had no idea what Dad would think about any of this insanity. She asked if I'd visit her wherever they took her, and I promised I would if she'd just unlock the door and let them help her. The negotiator must have been coaching someone because I heard whispers in the background telling me what to say next. Mom kept talking about how Dad understood her, and how they were meant to be together forever, and I just kept agreeing with whatever she said while watching the TV show The Police slowly moving closer to the car. She asked if I remembered their wedding anniversary, and started describing their first dance while I made agreeing noises, and watched an officer with a special tool approach the driver's side. Tell them not to hurt him, she said suddenly, and I promised they'd be gentle with Dad while she cried about how cold he'd gotten and how she'd tried to keep him warm, but the ice kept melting. The line went quiet for a long moment, and then I heard the car door open and Mom screaming, "No!" before the phone cut off. On TV, I watched them pull her from the car with her arms reaching back toward Dad while she wailed about their eternal love. The negotiator grabbed my phone and started telling me what to say while I watched everything unfold on the news. He wrote phrases on a notepad and pointed at them while I repeated words about understanding and love and needing help. My voice shook as I told Mom that Dad would want her to be safe and that we all loved her no matter what. The negotiator kept nodding and writing more things for me to say while on TV. I could see police officers slowly moving closer to the car. I felt like a puppet reading someone else's script, but I kept talking because I wanted this to end without anyone getting hurt. Mom was crying harder now and asking if I really meant it when I said I still loved her. The negotiator wrote yes in big letters and underlined it 3 times, so I said it again and again until she believed me. Hours passed like this with me saying whatever they told me to say while watching my mother fall apart on live television. The sun was setting when Mom finally said she would come out if they promised to be gentle with Dad's body. The negotiator had me repeat that promise 5 times before she unlocked the door. On the TV screen, I watched her push the door open slowly with her hands already raised above her head. She looked so small and broken standing there in her dirty clothes with her hair all tangled. The police moved in carefully while she kept looking back at the car where Dad was still buckled in. They put handcuffs on her gently while she sobbed about how they were separating true love. A news camera zoomed in on her face as she looked directly at it and said she did it all for love because death couldn't keep them apart. Her makeup was running down her face and her eyes looked wild, and that image became the photo every news outlet would use for months. I turned away from the TV, but the detective made me watch as they led her to a police car. Meanwhile, Alicia Rosa and her team in hazmat suits approached Dad's body in the car. They had to use special equipment because of how bad the decomposition had gotten after days without refrigeration. The detective explained they would need to do tests and document everything before Dad could be returned to us. He drove me to the station while Nelson followed in our car because they needed my full statement about everything that had happened. At the station, they put me in a small room with a recorder and asked me to start from the beginning. I talked for 2 hours about Mom's prison time and her release and finding out about Dad's stolen body. The detective took notes and asked questions about Mom's mental health history and if she'd ever done anything like this before. When we finished, he told me Mom was in a holding cell, refusing to talk to anyone except me. Her lawyer, a tired-looking public defender, met me in the hallway and warned that seeing her might be hard. He said she wasn't making much sense and kept asking for me, so maybe I could help calm her down. They led me through metal doors and down a hallway that smelled like bleach and despair. Mom was sitting on a bench in a small cell wearing an orange jumpsuit that made her look even smaller. When she saw me, she jumped up and pressed her face against the bars, asking if I hated her. I stood there not knowing what to say because I loved my mother, but I was horrified by what she'd done. She looked nothing like the determined woman who had dug up a grave and stolen a body. Now she was just scared and confused and kept asking why they took Dad away from her. I told her I didn't hate her, but I didn't understand why she did it. She started crying and talking about how unfair it was that she missed the funeral and couldn't say goodbye. The public defender pulled me aside and explained that Mom would need psychiatric evaluation before any court proceedings. He said based on what he'd seen, she would probably be found incompetent to stand trial. That meant she'd go to a mental facility instead of prison, which was better, but still felt like losing her. Mom kept calling my name and reaching through the bars trying to touch my hand. I let her hold my fingers for a minute before the guard said visiting time was over. Nelson was waiting in the lobby and took me straight to his parents' house to get away from the reporters. His mother had made chicken soup that smelled good, but I couldn't eat more than 2 bites. His father kept patting my shoulder and saying everything would be okay, even though we all knew it wouldn't. They put me in Nelson's old bedroom with the baseball trophies and band posters while the news played downstairs. I could hear them talking in low voices about what to do and how to help me through this. The next morning, Duncan Irwin called to say Dad's body had been returned to the cemetery. He was personally overseeing everything, and they had installed new cameras and motion sensors everywhere. They even hired overnight security guards to patrol the grounds so nothing like this could ever happen again. He kept apologizing and promising that Dad would be safe now, though the damage was already done. The funeral director suggested we do a private reburial without telling anyone to avoid media attention. Just me and Nelson and Rachel would stand at the grave while they lowered Dad back into the ground. No flowers or speeches or ceremony because we just wanted it to be over. Rachel flew in from Florida looking exhausted and guilty about not watching Mom more carefully. We met at the cemetery early in the morning before anyone else was around. The funeral director had everything ready, and the new security guard nodded at us as we walked to Dad's grave. The hole was already dug and the casket was waiting to be lowered. The workers started the motor and the casket began its slow descent back into the earth. Rachel grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard as we watched Dad disappear into the ground for the second time. Her fingers were cold and shaking just like mine were. The cemetery director stood off to the side with his hands folded, looking guilty about the whole mess. 2 security guards watched from their golf cart near the road, part of the new protection system they'd installed. The casket reached the bottom with a soft thud that made my stomach turn. Workers began shoveling dirt back into the hole while we stood there crying. Rachel kept wiping her nose with a tissue that was falling apart from being used too much. The sound of dirt hitting the casket lid made me want to run away, but I forced myself to stay. This wasn't the peaceful goodbye we'd given Dad 6 months ago with flowers and music and friends. This was just fixing a violation, putting him back where he belonged after Mom's sick adventure. The workers finished filling the hole and started smoothing the dirt on top. One of them placed the temporary marker back in position until the headstone could be reset. Rachel finally let go of my hand, and we walked back to the parking lot without saying anything. 3 days later, the psychiatric evaluation results came through. The doctor called me to his office at the courthouse to explain what they'd found. He spread out papers on his desk showing test results and brain scans and medication histories. Mom had severe delusional disorder mixed with untreated bipolar disorder that had been getting worse for years. He pointed to different areas on the brain scan showing abnormal activity patterns. The combination of grief, guilt about missing the funeral, and her mental illness created what he called a perfect storm. She genuinely believed Dad wanted to be with her, and that death was just keeping them apart. Treatment would take years if it worked at all, since some delusions were too deep to ever fully disappear. He gave me pamphlets about the condition and support groups for families. I stuffed them in my purse and left feeling numb. The next week, I had my first appointment with Natalie Savage at her office downtown. She had a small room with 2 chairs and a box of tissues on the table between us. I sat there for 10 minutes, not knowing where to start. She waited patiently while I tried to find words for what I was feeling. Finally, I just started talking about finding out what Mom did and couldn't stop. Some sessions I made progress understanding my anger and disgust mixed with love for the woman who raised me. Other times I just cried for the whole hour while she handed me tissues. She never judged or pushed, just let me work through it at my own pace. The legal stuff dragged on for weeks with hearing after hearing. Mom's lawyer kept filing motions and requesting more evaluations while the prosecutor wanted maximum charges. I had to testify about Mom's behavior before and after the incident. The judge finally ruled Mom incompetent to stand trial based on all the psychiatric reports. They committed her to the state psychiatric facility indefinitely instead of prison. She would get medication and monitoring, but the doctor warned me not to expect quick improvements. Some delusions were too deep to treat easily, and Mom's were about love and loss, the strongest emotions people have. The paperwork took another 2 weeks to process before the transfer happened. A month after the commitment, I went to visit Mom at the facility. The building was old brick with small windows and metal doors that buzzed when they opened. A nurse led me to the visiting room where Mom sat at a plastic table. She looked smaller somehow, wearing a gray sweatsuit instead of her usual nice clothes. Her hair was flat and her face puffy from the medications. She looked up at me confused, like she was trying to remember who I was. "Martha?" she said slowly, her voice thick from the drugs. I sat across from her and tried not to cry at how different she looked. She asked where Dad was, and I told her he was at peace now. That seemed to calm her down, and she nodded like it made sense. The wild energy from the police chase was completely gone. She was just a hollow shell of my mother, moving and talking in slow motion. The nurse said visiting time was up after 30 minutes. Mom didn't protest or try to hold on to me like she had in jail. She just shuffled back to her room when the orderly came to get her. I sat in my car in the parking lot and sobbed for 20 minutes before I could drive home. The next day, Glenn Contreras sent an official letter apologizing for the ankle monitor failure. The parole department was implementing new protocols and better technology to prevent it from happening again. The letter felt empty and meaningless, just legal protection against lawsuits. No system upgrade would give me back my normal life or undo what happened. I threw the letter in the trash without finishing it. Nelson found me crying on the couch that night and suggested we take a real vacation to get away from everything. We flew to Colorado the next week and spent 7 days hiking in the mountains. The thin air made talking while walking hard, so we mostly stayed quiet. We didn't mention Mom or Dad or the news coverage that had finally died down. For a few minutes at a time, I could forget the horror and just feel the mountain breeze and see the aspens shaking in the wind. At night, we stayed in a small cabin with no TV or internet. Nelson cooked simple meals while I sat by the fire and tried to feel normal. When we got back home, most of the media attention had moved on to other tragedies. Our neighbors still stared and whispered when I got the mail, but at least reporters weren't camping outside anymore. I could go to the grocery store without being recognized most of the time. Someone had created a Wikipedia page about the case that I refused to read. 2 months after everything started, I finally went back to work. My coworkers didn't know what to say to me. Some were too nice, bringing me coffee and asking if I needed anything every 5 minutes. Others avoided me completely, looking away when we passed in the hall. My boss offered a flexible schedule so I could keep my therapy appointments. That helped more than all the sympathy cards people left on my desk. I threw myself into spreadsheets and reports, grateful for normal boring tasks that had nothing to do with graves or mental illness. 3 months into treatment, Mom started showing improvement according to her doctor. She was beginning to understand that taking Dad's body was wrong, though she still insisted she did it from love. The doctor said this was actually progress, since at least she was grounding herself in reality instead of complete delusion. She could hold conversations now without drifting into fantasy. The medications were finally reaching the right levels in her system. She even started participating in group therapy and art class. The doctor was cautiously optimistic, but warned me recovery would be slow with lots of setbacks. I kept visiting every month, watching tiny improvements each time. The psychiatrist at the facility suggested I try a support group for families dealing with severe mental illness, and I found one that met Tuesday evenings at the community center downtown. I walked into that first meeting feeling completely out of place, sitting in a circle of plastic chairs with about 12 other people who looked just as tired as I felt. The facilitator had us go around introducing ourselves, and when my turn came, I could barely get the words out about Mom stealing Dad's body without my voice cracking. A woman across from me nodded and said her brother had tried to dig up their mother, convinced she was still alive. And everyone else shared similar stories of delusions and breaks from reality, that made me realize I wasn't alone in dealing with this kind of trauma. We spent the hour discussing medication schedules and visiting hours and how to handle the guilt when you're relieved they're locked up somewhere safe. Rachel started coming with me to the meetings after the third week, and we'd grab coffee afterward to compare notes about Mom's progress. She handled all the insurance paperwork and legal documents while I focused on the actual visits and talking to Mom's doctors about her treatment plan. We developed a system where she'd visit on Wednesdays, and I'd go on Saturdays so Mom had regular contact. But neither of us got too overwhelmed. The facility sent weekly reports showing Mom was taking her medications consistently and participating in group therapy sessions without incident. Her doctor adjusted the dosages several times, trying to find the right balance between keeping her stable and not making her too sedated to function. After about 4 months of steady improvement, they moved her to a less restrictive wing, where she had more privileges like access to the library and art supplies. 6 months after everything happened, I finally worked up the courage to visit Dad's grave again. I brought fresh roses and sat on the new bench they'd installed near his headstone, talking to him about Mom's treatment and how I was doing in therapy. The cemetery had installed cameras everywhere and hired security guards who patrolled at night, which made me feel safer, even though I still checked over my shoulder every few minutes. Duncan had personally overseen the restoration of Dad's gravesite and planted new grass that was finally starting to grow in properly. I stayed for about an hour telling Dad about work and Nelson and how Rachel was helping with everything. 8 months into treatment, Mom's doctor called to say she'd been approved for supervised day passes. We met at a small cafe 2 blocks from the facility with an orderly sitting at the next table pretending to read a newspaper. Mom looked healthier than she had in years, with clear eyes and steady hands as she sipped her tea and asked about my job and Nelson and if I'd been eating enough. She apologized 3 times in the first 10 minutes for everything she'd put me through, but we both knew not to mention Dad or what she'd done. The orderly gave us 90 minutes before walking Mom back to the facility while I sat in my car processing how normal she'd seemed. These supervised visits became monthly events where we'd meet for lunch or coffee and talk about safe topics like the weather or what books she was reading. The anniversary of Dad's death was approaching, and I'd been dreading it for weeks when Mom's letter arrived. She asked if she could acknowledge the date somehow. Maybe send flowers to the cemetery, or make a donation to the Cancer Society in his name. Her doctor had included a note saying this might be therapeutic for her recovery, but I wasn't ready to have her involved with anything related to Dad's memorial yet. I wrote back saying I appreciated the thought but needed more time, and she responded with a simple note saying she understood. Instead, I decided to organize a small memorial service with just the people who actually knew Dad before everything happened. Nelson helped me reserve a private room at Dad's favorite restaurant, where about 15 of us gathered to share stories about his terrible golf game and how he'd always fall asleep watching football. Rachel brought photo albums from when we were kids, and Dad's old college roommate told stories I'd never heard before about their adventures. We laughed more than we cried, and it felt like the funeral Dad should have had if Mom hadn't been in prison and everything hadn't gone so wrong. Mom's doctor called the next week to say she'd started art therapy and was showing real talent with watercolors. A few days later, an envelope arrived with 3 small paintings of scenes from when I was little. Me on a swing set, our old dog in the backyard, Dad teaching me to ride a bike. The images were soft and dreamy and clearly painted with love, but I couldn't bring myself to frame them, so they went into a box in the closet with her letters. She kept sending new paintings every few weeks showing happier times from before the divorce and prison and the breakdown. Her doctor said this was her way of processing the past and reconnecting with positive memories, which was apparently a good sign for her recovery. A full year passed since that horrible night with the Facebook posts, and life had developed a new routine. I visited Mom monthly at the facility where she'd become something of a mentor to newer patients in group therapy, sharing her story as a cautionary tale about untreated mental illness. She understood she'd probably never be released, but seemed to have accepted that reality with more grace than I expected. The facility had become her world, and she'd found purpose in helping others navigate their own struggles with delusions and medication compliance. Nelson proposed on a quiet Thursday evening while we were cooking dinner together. He just turned to me while stirring pasta and said we should get married. No ring or grand gesture, just a simple declaration that he wanted to build a life with me despite all the complicated family baggage. I said yes immediately, and we called his parents first, then Rachel, then Natalie to share the news. 2 days later, a card arrived from Mom with a genuinely sweet message about finding happiness and building something better than what she and Dad had. She'd included an old photo from her wedding to Dad with a note on the back saying she hoped I'd find joy without the pain they'd caused each other, and it was the most self-aware thing she'd written since before her breakdown. The next few months blurred together in a routine of therapy sessions and careful progress. Natalie started spacing out our appointments when I could get through whole sessions without crying about that night. I'd sit in her office describing how the nightmares were fading, and she'd nod while taking notes. The panic attacks stopped coming every time I saw a Facebook notification. I could drive past the cemetery without my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Nelson noticed I wasn't waking up screaming anymore and started sleeping better himself. After 6 months of twice-weekly sessions, Natalie said we could move to monthly check-ins. The wedding planning started small because neither of us wanted a big production after everything. Nelson's mom helped pick out a simple dress while his dad reserved a private room at a local restaurant. We sent invitations to just 20 people who'd stood by us through the worst of it. Rachel flew in early to help with last-minute details and stayed at our place. The morning of the wedding, Mom's doctor called to set up a video connection for the ceremony. She appeared on the laptop screen wearing a nice blouse the facility had helped her pick out. Her face looked fuller and healthier than it had in years from regular meals and medication. She cried happy tears when she saw me in my dress and kept saying how beautiful everything looked. Nelson's cousin held the laptop during the ceremony, so Mom could watch us exchange vows. The reception stayed quiet and intimate with just our closest friends sharing simple toasts. Nobody mentioned Dad's empty chair or the reason Mom was watching through a screen. We cut the cake and danced to a few songs before heading home exhausted but genuinely happy. A month later, I drove to the cemetery for my regular visit to Dad's grave. The new security cameras Duncan had installed were visible on every corner. Fresh flowers from other families decorated the surrounding plots, and people walked the paths without looking over their shoulders. I sat on the bench they'd installed near Dad's headstone and talked to him about the wedding. Duncan stopped by during his rounds and mentioned they'd become a model for cemetery security nationwide. Other places were calling to ask about their motion sensors and overnight guards. He said families felt safe visiting again and thanked me for pushing for the changes. The following week, Mom's doctor called with news about her progress in treatment. She'd been stable on her medication for over a year and participating in all her therapy programs. The review board was considering transferring her to a less restrictive facility with more privileges. They needed family input and asked if I'd write a letter of support for the transfer. I sat at my computer for hours trying to find the right words. Finally, I wrote about seeing two different people, the sick woman who stole Dad and the mother who raised me. I said she deserved comfort while getting treatment, even if she'd never be truly free. The board approved the transfer 3 weeks later, and Mom moved to a facility with art rooms and gardens. 2 years after that horrible night, Natalie asked if I'd speak at her support group for families. I stood in front of 15 people and talked about loving someone with severe mental illness. Everyone nodded when I described the impossible balance between anger and compassion. A woman cried when I explained how I'd learned to separate Mom's illness from Mom herself. They asked questions about setting boundaries and dealing with public shame. I told them healing wasn't linear, and some days were still hard. After the meeting, 3 people thanked me for sharing and said it helped them feel less alone. Mom and I developed a new routine built on clear boundaries and honest communication. We talked every Sunday morning for exactly 30 minutes with specific topics to avoid. I visited monthly, always with Nelson, and we'd walk the facility gardens together. She showed me her art studio where she taught painting to other patients twice a week. Her students' work covered the walls, and she knew each person's story and struggles. She'd found real purpose in helping others navigate their mental health journeys. The facility newsletter featured an article about her teaching program and its positive impact. During one visit, she gave me a folder of recommendation letters from her students. They wrote about how she helps them find beauty even in dark places. I decided to establish a scholarship fund in Dad's name at the local community college. The application focused on accounting students who'd overcome family challenges or trauma. Setting it up took months of paperwork and meetings with the financial aid office. The first recipient was a young woman whose mother was also in psychiatric care. She wrote a thank you letter about how the scholarship meant someone understood her struggle. Every year, we'd host a small dinner for the recipients to share their stories. The students reminded me that good things could grow from terrible pain. Life settled into something that felt genuinely good, even if it wasn't perfect. Mom stayed stable on her medication and found meaning in her limited world. Dad's grave became a peaceful place to visit and remember the good times. Nelson and I started talking about having kids someday, knowing we'd handle mental health differently. We'd teach them about boundaries and unconditional love and getting help when you need it. The trauma would always be part of our story, but it didn't define our future anymore. So yeah, that's basically it. Thanks for sticking around. It feels like catching up with a friend every time. Swing by again if you feel like it.